Howdy folks, and welcome back again. So now that we have our bows, swords, shield, basically everything the character can equip, let's adjust it just a little bit so that when we equip things, you'll actually see it on the character. And then when we draw it, it'll be in our hands, and then when it goes back to the sheath. So this one might be a little bit of a long video, but it'll be oh so worth it, adds a little bit to it. So I'm back in our project. The other one is a duplicate I made just to test some things and, hammer out details beforehand. So in order to do all this, first thing we need to do is we need to add a few more slots to our character's mesh. So I'm going to open my player blueprint, go to the mesh, and double click to open the skeletal mesh, which is just right here under mesh. I'm going to go back to the player blueprint and go ahead and open up my animation blueprint also, because we're going to need that. So inside my skeleton, I am going to add a slot on the back for the shield. So I'm going to add a socket, and I'm going to rename it. Ooh, my microphone's falling. Let's see. Shield stow. Then I'm going to right click and add a preview asset. I'm going to find my shield, and I'm just going to position it where I want it. Now if you're using this one thing you'll notice is that if you leave it this size, then her arm's going to clip through it when she runs. So I'm just going to kind of scale it down a little bit and make it more like a buckler. Just kind of reposition it in place, and that's looking nice. So that if you're scaling, which you can hit R to go directly into the scale instead of having to click up here or wherever it's at, I forget. If you hold control on the keyboard and then drag, it'll scale it across all instead of doing like that. Alright, so that's looking, decent. So now I'm going to add a socket to her hips for the sword. So I'm going to hips, add socket, and this is going to be renamed to sword stow. Then I'm going to, add my preview asset. Oh. Let's see, sword. I'll just use my rusted sword. That looks inappropriate. So I'm going to rotate it around, and then I'm going to move it in place. And then just kind of position it where it would be. So I'm going to say somewhere about there is looking decent. Maybe forward a little bit. Rotated. That's looking good. Now one more that we need to do on the back. I'm going to add one more socket to the back, and this is going to be for the bow. So bow stow. Wait, I used bow stow for something else. Maybe I need to use bow stow. Let's screw it. Excuse my language, I'm sorry. Let's see. Then I'm going to add my preview asset. I'm going to find my bow mesh. And then I'll just rotate it around and position it where I need it. So that's maybe the other way. Maybe the other way. That's looking decent, I suppose. Bow stow, shield stow, sword stow. what's the one in her left hand called for the bow slot, shield slot? And then it should be what, weapon slot, right? In the right hand. Where's the right hand? Right hand. Weapon slot. Alright, so I'm sorry, I just wanted to double check everything. So alright, so now in the player blueprint, we need to update our use item function. So we always basically want to be destroying whatever we have. Anytime we change, we want to destroy whatever there, and then spawn our new gear. So since we set our destroy gear function up to check to see if everything is valid before it destroys, there it is. We can get rid of this valid check and then hook everything directly into there. Because this way it'll check inside that function before it destroys anything and then spawn the gear accordingly. Now we need to update our spawn gear function just a little bit. So instead of switching on whether or not the bow is drawn, I'm just going to get rid of that. I'm going to back the sword thing up, and from the class of it, I'm going to see if it's valid. Basically, everything that's valid, we want to go ahead and spawn. So if this sword is valid, then we want to see if we have our sword currently drawn. Because if we do, then we want to spawn it in our hand, and if we don't, we want to spawn it on our back. So we'll need to establish the slots accordingly. So is the sword a valid class? If so, do we have a sword drawn? Because if it's not, then we're not going to be spawning a sword, but we will want to check to see if we need to spawn a shield. So we can just hook this directly all the way to the valid check on this line, because if we don't have a sword equipped, then we can't draw the sword, so we don't have to check to see if we can just hook directly onto this line to see if the shield is a valid class. Just in case you equip a shield first, this will avoid some errors in the thing. So is the sword drawn? If not, then we want to go ahead and equip it. Oh, if it is, then we want to equip it in our weapon slot. I hooked that false to the wrong one. We are gonna do that, but it's gonna be on the other line, because this will equip it into her hand if the sword's not drawn. So that's my bad. That's my bad. All right. So is the sword valid? True. Is the sword drawn? If yes, spawn it into her hand, and then check to see if there's a shield equipped, and if so, spawn that into her hand. Now, if the sword is not drawn, then we want to grab all of this, pretty much, and we will Control C and duplicate it. Bring it on down, and from our false, once the sword is valid checked to be true, but it's not drawn, then we want to go ahead and spawn it on our weapon stow. Oh, and we want to hook our class to it also, so it knows what actor to spawn. Now we will set that sword reference, and then when we attach the actor to the component, we want to make sure it's attached to the right socket also. So then after that, we want to do our shield check. So I'm going to grab all this. You can pretty much just grab everything. Control C to duplicate, Control V to paste, or Control C to copy, Control V to paste. Words are hard. So then we want to spawn it in our shield stow slot and attach it to our shield stow slot. So if the sword is not drawn, but these things are valid, we want to do all this. Now from our checking to see if the sword is valid, right here, the false, we still want to check to see if the shield is valid, because if it is, then we'll want to spawn it. But we want to spawn it to the slot on our back if it's valid. So now what we want to do is on the false for the sword drawn. Oh, actually, we want to just go ahead and do this at the end of all of them. Let's see. So I'm going to drag this to the end. And then I want to do a branch from our false. So if the sword and shield is not equipped and it's spawning on the back, then I want to check to see if the bow is drawn. Bow drawn. And then I want to check to see if my bow is even valid. Which you can do these in the opposite order if you like, which I will. I'll just go ahead and do that. I'm going to check to see if I have a bow that's valid. That one I can hook to both. Then I'll add a branch. So if the bow is valid, then I want to check to see if the bow is drawn. Now if it is not, if it is drawn, that's right. If it is drawn, then I want to do this and equip it to the bow slot. But if it's not, it's looking a little bit of a mess right now. If it's not drawn, then we can pretty much copy all this and paste it down. Hook our bow class back to the spawn actor. And then we want to change this to the stow slot, update our slots. And then compile. So I know it's a little bit more convoluted now, but we're pretty much just checking to see, is our sword valid? If so, then is it drawn? And if so, then we're changing its equip slot based on that. But if it's not, we still want to check to see if we have a sword, or if this is a valid class. Which if the shield is not a valid class, let's say they find the bow first, then we want to go from here all the way to our bow validity check. So it's just a lot of checks and balances to see if everything exists on the character's menu, and if it does, then we spawn accordingly, or we skip over and go check the next item. So bow stow, bow stow. All of this should be the same. You want to remember that this needs to be snap to target, and this needs to be RTS actor on all of them. Alright, so now in our use item function, it'll check to see if we have one equipped and destroy it, and then spawn it on the character. So I'm going to check it real quick just to make sure it's doing as it's supposed to right now. So there's my shield. There's what? There's my sword. There's my bow. Everything's doing right except the sword. Why is the sword doing what the sword's doing? I probably called it sword stow in there, didn't I? I did. Okay, so make sure it's sword stow and then attaching to the sword stow. You want to make sure that those sockets, the names match, or else that exactly will happen. So let me grab everything real quick. Bow equips. Shield equips, sword equips. Now if I pick up, oh. Yeah, if you interact with stuff right now, it's gonna it's gonna pretty much pick it right back up. So let's let's fix our pickup function. Oh, God, I'm stumbling over words right now. I don't know why. Alright, so we want to check. We're going to get rid of this branch. I'm going to get rid of that and that. Because I'm going to drag out my sword reference. Get that. See if it's valid. If it's not, then we'll pick up the very first item. If it is, and the shield is not valid, we want to check and see if we've got a bow. So do we have a bow yes. So if the shield is valid, then we want to check to see, well, really from either one of these, we want to check to see if the bow is also valid. So is valid on that. This part's where it gets a little convoluted too. So if the sword is valid, the shield is valid, and the bow is valid, then we'll want to drag out one more of these. Control C. Set that to 4. And then we'll interact based on that. And if the is not, then we'll interact on 3. Is not valid, then we interact on 2. I know it gets a little complicated. We'll fix this up in another one, but this will make it to where it should work for right now. So let me just check everything. So yeah, I'm not picking up anything, but if I try to pick up a potion, yeah. So that's working for now. But you'll notice if we try to equip anything, it'll pull out a duplicate of everything. The reason it's doing that is because we need to add a function into our player blueprint. So I'm going to go into my functions and I'm going to add one called switch melee and one more called switch ranged. Now in the switched melee, what we want to do is we want to go into our spawn gear and we want to grab all our attach actors. Actually, let's just do it from scratch. So switch melee. Now we're only going to be calling this if our sword is drawn. So we don't have to worry about valid checks. But we will get to see if the sword is drawn. So if it's not drawn, as in we're putting it away, we want to grab our sword reference, attach actor to component. We'll drag out our mesh because we want to attach our sword to our mesh at the new slot, which is sword stow. I think I just put it. And we'll make sure it's snap to target on everything. Then we want to check to see if our shield reference is valid. Oh, no. Yeah, no, yeah, we want to check to see if that's valid. And if it is, Control C and Control V, because we want to attach our shield reference to the mesh also in our shield stow slot. Now what we can do is we can just go ahead and copy pretty much all of this, paste it up here, and if our sword is drawn, then we want to attach our sword to our weapon slot or whatever you've named yours, and if our shield reference is valid up here, then we want to attach it to the shield slot. Alright, so now we need to actually call that function instead of our switch gear. So in my animation blueprint, I'm going to go to my event graph, and up here where we're spawning the gear, basically we're pulling the sword out, we don't want to call it the spawn gear function anymore. We want to call our switch melee. We want to call that from the spawn and the destroy. So I'll get rid of this. So now if I go in, pick up my sword, pick up my shield, and I equip them, now they're spawning, or they're switching over to the hands, and then when I put them back, then they're going away, or going back to where they're supposed to. But now we need to fix up the bow also. So back in my animation blueprint, I'm going to find my draw bow, and I'm going to have to swap these out because I'm going to have to swap out the spawn gear and the destroy gear on this one. So I'm going to delete that notify, and I'm going to add one called switch bow, because we can't use the same one on them anymore. And on stow bow, right where that one's at, I'll just call it stow bow, just like the animation. So now in the animation blueprint, we'll get our switch bow notify and our stow bow notify. And for this, we're going to call our switch ranged function that we haven't set up yet, but we will right now. So back in the player blueprint, I'm going to go to my switch ranged and find out if my bow is drawn, get a branch, and if it is, where's my bow reference? I want to attach this actor to component. So if it's not drawn, I'll do that one first. Grab my mesh, hook it to the parent slot, and the socket is going to be bow stow. I want to snap to target on all rules. Control C, Control V to copy and paste. Hook my bow reference to the target and the mesh to here. And if it is drawn, then hook it to my bow slot. So now everything's equipping as it should. But now it's deleting if I only have a bow equipped. So let me check my event graph. It takes a bit to find that. So from the is not valid of the sword reference, I'm gonna see you know what? Well, the important thing for this video is that we got them equipped. In the very next one, we will fix up this picking up items function and update it. But for now, draw our sword and shield. She has the bow on her back still. Put them away, goes back. Can draw out her bow. She's got the sword and shield on her back still. Put it away. And that's all working like it's supposed to. Now there is a little bit of a size discrepancy between the shield on her back and the shield in her hand, so I'm going to fix that on mine real quick. So what's going on there is it's because I altered the size of the socket on her back but didn't do it to the one in her hand. So I'm going to add my shield preview asset real quick so you can see. R to switch to my scale tool, and then just scale it down to match. So let me just grab everything real quick, bring it full screen for a better view, and now it looks more like a buckler, which I'll reposition it, but for now that's looking good. One last thing to check is if I equip a sword with the sword in my hand, then you'll see it changes automatically also. And then when it goes back, it goes back. Alright, so in the next one we'll fix up that interact function to make it a little bit more streamlined, because this is a little bit convoluted. But yeah, that's it for this one, and I will see y'all in the next one. Bye bye.